This is ANCAP-SU, and we're going to talk about Trump's initiative to ban mail-in voting and electronic voting machines in the United States. Trump made a post on social media saying, "I'm going to lead a movement to get rid of all mail-in voting, and also the voting machines that are highly insecure, inaccurate, expensive, and controversial, costing 10 times more than a paper ballot with a watermark, and that it's faster, leaves no doubt, and by the end of the night, you know who won and lost the election." So, he's trying to make this change. It's worth noting that he doesn't have that power in the United States. Because the electoral system in the United States is decentralized. Each municipality conducts elections as they see fit. The whole system is bottom-up. Actually, this is one of the things I criticize in Brazil. Brazil has a centralized electoral system managed by the CE. It's practically a form of communism. We live in a kind of communism without realizing it because we have no compared to the rest of the world, right? But it's basically a communist-like system where everything is centralized and everyone uses the same system throughout Brazil. And so on. I don't really like this solution. In the United States, each municipality does things differently. You can see how this gives more authenticity to the election because, for example, if there was fraud in municipality XYZ, okay, there might have been fraud there. But would that necessarily change the final result of the election? Because it's just one municipality, the others don't use the same system, they're different, right? So, this is a point that I think actually gives more security to the system than anything else. But now Trump wants to ban voting machines and mail-in voting. Let's understand this story. This news was suggested by various people, including those whose suggestions are not typically considered. Thanks to those who suggested news on our site, Libertarian.com, and thanks to you for watching our video. If you like our content, please like and subscribe to our channel. So, Trump wants to ban mail-in voting and electronic voting machines. He's saying he's leading a movement according to this excerpt of what he said. All the others find ways to generate fraud and will start this effort, which will be strongly opposed by Democrats because they cheat at all levels. We're going to try to have an election in 2026, the midterm election. In the United States, you have the presidential election and a significant portion of Congress in 1 year, followed by another election 2 years later, which is also for Congress, right? Members of Congress serve only 2 years per term. So, regarding this midterm in 2026, he says a lot of things here. Criticizing the 2020 election as fraudulent, referring to the election he lost to Biden. Every election worldwide in all countries is driven by previous fraud. That's why you have very different electoral systems in various countries, because countries always evolve this way. The election, in theory, is a straightforward process. People vote, someone counts the votes, and the person is elected. However, what happens is that everywhere, there are people trying to cheat the system. And when people realize that cheating is occurring, they try to find a way to work around it. That's how electoral systems evolve, not just electoral systems, but also electoral legislation in various countries. Here in Brazil, this was clearly the case. If you examine how the various Brazilian electoral codes were developed, it was always like this. There was an election, fraud occurred, and they created an electoral code to address that fraud. There was another election, more fraud occurred, and they made changes to the code to address that other fraud. The electronic voting machines in Brazil were introduced to prevent fraud. There was significant fraud in Brazil when votes were counted manually, similar to what Trump now advocates for in the United States. Personally, I believe that mail-in voting in the United States is highly susceptible to fraud. It's very easy to buy votes that way, isn't it? If it were in Brazil, it would cause a huge mess. But what happens in the United States? As it's a country where people earn well to buy votes there, you would have to invest a lot of money to buy enough votes there. That's why they don't have this problem with fraud, right? Here in Brazil, we do. This is the problem in Brazil. We have a problem not only because we're a very unequal country with very poor people. So there are regions where votes can be bought for 10 reais, and that's enough to buy an election, you see? Because at 10 reais per vote, you can buy an election. And it's not just that. In many regions, particularly in the Northeast, I'm not being prejudiced against the Northeast, just stating a fact. What's the situation there? In the Northeast, there are many electoral fiefdoms. It's not just the Northeast. There are places here in Rio de Janeiro with electoral fiefdoms. São Paulo also has electoral fiefdoms, but in many places in the Northeast, it becomes almost a cultural phenomenon. As election time approaches, people already expect, I'm going to make money this year because someone's going to buy votes here. Every election year I make money. Because people buy votes, you understand? It's already become a culture. People expect it and are ready to sell their votes. These are sometimes more pragmatic than we are. We get preoccupied with politics. Who's going to win, who's going to lose, and so on. The person there is more practical than all of us here, right? I'm going to sell my vote. The guy is paying me 10 reais. Damn, 10 reais is enough to buy a drink at the bar. I'm already profiting. Damn, screw it. Politicians are all the same anyway. Maybe they're more right than we are here, right? I think it's not quite like that because there will be much worse politicians in the future, in the long run, right? The politician doesn't help at all, but can cause significant problems. So, electing the wrong politician creates this problem. It's not that they're going to help. No politician is going to help anyone, but they can cause trouble, right? Anyway, going back to the United States, in the US, they don't have this issue with vote buying. Here in Brazil, this is a historical issue. It dates back to the time of Pedro II. Yes, during the Brazilian monarchy, the empire period, elections were already taking place in Brazil. There were presidential elections, obviously, but there were elections for mayor and other positions. And there were already these electoral strongholds that people created in the Northeast and elsewhere. This is precisely a region where the person knows everyone. There are already vote pullers, electoral canvassers, who distribute money, and being an electoral canvasser is a lawful activity if you persuade people to vote. It's lawful to persuade, let's vote for so-and-so because they're handsome, have nice hair, speak loudly, and are cool. This is typically the argument people use, isn't it? Is the guy right-wing or left-wing? It's changing a bit now. Until now, it's been a bit more ideological, but anyway now. Often the truth is that the campaign worker crosses this line and says, I've come here for you to vote for so-and-so. There are places where a vote is worth around $100, others where it's $50, and others where it's $10. So it depends on the culture of the region and the culture of the people who vote there. So in the United States, there's only mail-in voting. They've never had much fraud with it, but Trump is raising a reasonable concern. I really think mail-in voting leaves a lot of room for vote selling. According to some people, what happened in 2020 was that individuals went to nursing homes and asked residents to vote and sign the ballot. This refers to nursing homes where the residents are very elderly. They're not even interested in politics or anything. They don't know what's going on and don't need to vote either, right? And in the United States, actually, nobody is required to vote because voting is optional, and they would take these signed envelopes from these people and cast their votes by mail. Right? So mail-in voting is very susceptible to fraud, which is why very few countries allow it. The United States is an exception. Maybe Trump is right about this, maybe he is, but the truth is this. The decision is made at the municipal level, okay? In the United States, according to their constitution, Trump doesn't have the authority to dictate how elections are conducted. Each county, which is roughly equivalent to a municipality, decides how elections are held, right? And he also doesn't want electronic voting machines. And again, I think he has a bias against it. I understand that Trump is very upset because he lost the 2020 election. He was very upset about it. I think there was some mail-in voting scheme that they used to try to win that election. I think there was. Now, regarding electronic voting machines, people have a strong prejudice against them. Electronic ballot boxes and the like. I think it's an unjustified prejudice. You have much greater security with electronic voting machines than with paper ballots. Paper ballots are much easier to tamper with than electronic voting. And that's why I tell you that the idea people here in Brazil have about the voting machine, that prints out the vote and puts it in a bag for you to cast a. No, because then we'll think everything is fine, that it's counting correctly, and so on. This is an illusion. From an information security standpoint, you're decreasing, not increasing, the security of the voting system. I agree that, from a political standpoint, as understood, this is what the German Supreme Court understood, for example. that the voting system needs to be understandable by a non-technical person, and I agree that most people think that printed votes are more reliable, so okay, I agree with the Supreme Court's decision. Maybe we should implement printed votes here in Brazil as well. But from a strict information security perspective, you compromise information security. You don't enhance it. It's easier to rig the ballot box with printed votes than the one with electronic voting. Oh, Peter, but how is that? It's very easy. What if the count of the printed votes differs from the count of the digital votes? What will be the outcome? Will the digital vote prevail? It will be the same as today. If it comes down to the printed vote, then fine. As I said, it's easier to rig the paper ballot than the electronic one. People will tamper with the paper. Oh no, but the ballot box is sealed and locked. My friend, fraud can occur in anything. Fraud isn't limited to electronic systems. There's fraud in seals, fraud in bags, fraud in paper, and fraud in pens. There's fraud in everything. Everything can be rigged. So the electronic system is harder to rig than these things. Paper, pens, ballot bags, and physical ballot boxes, everything is easier to rig. And another thing, you say, oh, if it's different, we'll annul it and redo the election. Friend, there'll never be another election in Brazil. Because people will go to the electoral zones. You know your opponent has votes in certain zones. Then you'll rig the paper in those electoral zones because they'll be annulled. Then you're done. You've won the election. You've annulled the zones where your opponent had more votes. Problem solved. You've managed to change the election result with fraud, even if the fraud annuls the result of that ballot box. In other words, there's no alternative. You're compromising the overall security of the voting system from a technical standpoint. I understand that from a layperson's perspective, someone unfamiliar with information security might think you're enhancing security. No, you're compromising security. You're providing another channel for an attacker to undermine the voting process. And again, why not use paper ballots? Everything should be on paper, as is the case in other countries. Because Brazil is a vast country, it's enormous in size, and the logistical challenge of conducting a paper-based vote count is even more complex. Only those who have never participated in a paper-based election totalization believe it's more secure. It's absurd in Brazil. The vote count used to begin at the end of the day when we used paper ballots. The vote count would start at the end of the day at 6 p.m., the polling stations would close, and the count would begin in. By around 8 p.m., there would be numerous poll watchers present. Then the count lasts until dawn, right? There are places with a ton of votes to count. My friend, at 3 in the morning, the people counting the votes are unsupervised. The person can put the vote for whoever they want. It's much easier to tamper with paper ballots than with electronic votes. And there's another principle regarding fraud. The less time available, the harder it is to commit fraud. If you have plenty of time, you can commit fraud more easily because you have more opportunities to do so. That period when you can commit fraud, oh, but in Taiwan they do it and it works. Friend, Taiwan is a whole country that's roughly the size of Maranhão. It has a similar population size. It's much easier for them to do, as I say. Each country has developed its electoral system based on past fraud experiences. And maybe I don't know. I'm not familiar with Taiwan's population. Perhaps they tend to be more honest and less inclined to commit fraud. Here in Brazil, I'm certain there's an attempt to cheat in everything. Everyone tries to cheat all the time. So, honestly, using paper ballots with photos here in Brazil would be disastrous. In the United States, maybe it's a good idea. Maybe they can make it work. I think they're going to fail with this. Fortunately, Trump doesn't have the authority to make these things mandatory. Let's see how Trump's initiative to end mail-in voting will turn out. I think mail-in voting really should be discontinued, you know? I think it's something that, or it should be like it originally was, only for members of the armed forces who were deployed in combat zones. Mail-in voting in the United States originated with this purpose. Because you know it's unfair for someone serving in Iraq, fighting for the United States, to be unable to vote in their hometown. So they introduced mail-in voting, right? Now today, anyone can provide a justification and vote, right? I really think there's a lot of fraud involved. Thanks for watching the video until the ending. In addition to liking, sharing, and subscribing to the channel, consider becoming a sponsor with amounts starting from $0.39 USD. Click the join button below to learn about the conditions and benefits of sponsoring the channel. For more information about our project, visit the websites listed on the screen.